everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today I'm really excited to be speaking with John Perry, Peter Clough and Doug Strycharczyk. Guys, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, we're very pleased to be here.
Hey, so excited to have you on. This is the first time on the Sports Psych Show. We're having more than two guests. So I'm going to try to be the best MC, the best master of ceremonies here as I possibly can be. But I'm so looking forward to this conversation. We're going to be talking all things mental toughness because we've got some world-leading experts about mental toughness. So super excited to be talking about this topic. Let's get started, as we always do on the Sports Psych Show, by having you guys introduce yourself to the audience. Peter, Professor Peter Clough, why don't you go first, sir?
Thank you very much. I'm a research professor. I helped develop the concept of mental toughness many years ago, and we've been elaborating it ever since. I was a professional sports person a long time ago, and starting point of much of the research was I wasn't tough enough to do it. So we might come back to that. And I'm currently technical director at AQR. So fingers in lots of pies like most people nowadays.
Peter, what sport was it?
It was surprising, rugby league.
Okay. Well, I was a professional golfer, Peter, and we certainly have one thing in common in terms of not quite the mental skill or the mental toughness, as we're going to talk about today, to reach the highest of levels. So let's move on to Doug Strycharczyk. If you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I'm Doug Strycharczyk. I'm the founder and CEO of AQR International, which is the business that has taken the concept and introduced it to people all over the world. So we now work in 81 countries. It's even surprised me with the uptake. And we work in every sector imaginable. So you've got the sports sector, the corporate sector, the education sector, the social mobility sector. And funny enough, they're all connected. We're beginning to see more and more of them using sport as a metaphor for either developing an organization, but especially developing young people. So, and of course, in modern times, it has its roots in the world of sport. So it all connects.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Dr. John Perry. Tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
Thanks, Dan. I suppose I'm an academic, but one of those academics that likes to keep in practice as well. So I kind of always studied psychology and sports science together. Been lecturing since 2005. And as my kind of research career developed, I did a PhD with Peter as my supervisor a long time ago now. Got interested in mental toughness, and I kind of take a real interest in trying to fill that space between research and practice, because it's really tough to do. Because from an academic point of view, we're really good at talking to other academics and getting carried away in statistical methodologies and things like that. One of the things that working alongside Doug and AQR has allowed us to do is make sure that rather than it being a construct that academics argue about, and academics will always argue, that's one thing for sure, it actually makes a difference in the real world, and we take it in, and whether it's in sport, business, health, education, it's actually great to see the kind of things we do have an impact. And I'm based over in Ireland these days as well, in Limerick.
Well, what I can safely say is something we all have in common is a passion to demystify mental constructs, psychological constructs, and concepts for people in sports and as well as other sectors and people functioning in other environments. And one way to do that is to write. And today we're going to talk about the third edition of your book, Developing Mental Toughness: Strategies to Improve Performance, Resilience and Wellbeing in Individuals and Organizations. And it's a book I've certainly lent on for a number of years, so super excited to see a third edition out. And I definitely think in our field sometimes mental toughness gets a little bit of a bad rap, or certainly there's a degree of misunderstanding around this term mental toughness. So that's where I'd be keen to start, and that's actually where you start in the book, around what actually mental toughness is and the myths around mental toughness. So I'd love to come to you first, Peter, as the preeminent expert in this area. Can you tell us what mental toughness is, and what are some of those myths? Where do people get it wrong around mental toughness?
I mean, there's a lot of myths, and back to that demystifying. I think we're all trying to do. And best advice I got from my supervisor was, if you can't spell it, don't say it. So we use the term mental toughness, which then gets oversimplified. It often gets misquoted. But the starting point, it was, when I played sport, my coach might suggest in a fairly aggressive way, not using exact words, that I wasn't tough enough. Now, the starting point there, what does that mean? And it means quite often, you're not like me. Yeah. So we work in a world of diversity. And when we're talking about toughness, we're talking about a range of skills. It's different than resilience, because resilience is about surviving pressure. But actually, sports people and most people quite like pressure. You're not avoiding pressure, it's dealing with it, and it's the positive aspects. So when we talk about mental toughness, we talk about, in a realistic world, bad things happen, but you deal with them. So it's not all rainbows, it's not all happiness, but you develop forward and you develop yourself from that. So people are scared of stress, but actually the more people I've talked to, certainly in sport and in business, they enjoy a stressful day. Doesn't have to be too stressful. It doesn't want to be horrible. So the mental toughness idea, therefore, is prospering under pressure, developing under pressure, recognizing the world as it is, and being able to cope with short-term and long-term stressors. So it's not a unitary concept. That's where most coaches start. You're on a 1 to 10. You're a 10 or a 1. And quite often, if you're not like them, or you talk back, or you explain the errors of people's ways, that's seen as not being tough. So it's broken down into 4 C's and then 8 factors. And just generally, control, commitment, challenge, and confidence make up mental toughness. And you can have a variety of profiles. So you could be high on one, low on other. And that's a really important point, that it's not just lacking toughness. It's more complex than that. And the end of my bit here will be the opposite of toughness, and where we disagree with many of our international colleagues, is sensitivity. It's not weakness. People have different aspects, and it's certainly possible to be a sensitive athlete, or somewhere in the mid ground, or really tough. You just need different tactics, different coaching approaches. And I think, I'll just finish on a point that good coaches I've worked with many horrible coaches, but many good coaches treat people as individuals. So it allows you to understand where people are coming from, and not just assuming somebody's tough or not tough. Somebody who cries when they lose a game, is that tough or is that not tough? And it depends why they're doing it, what they're thinking. So that's a brief introduction.
Thank you for that, and I think this definition is so pertinent in terms of if we've got a continuum of mental toughness, on the other end of what could be construed as high in mental toughness, low in mental toughness could be defined, or is defined, as mental sensitivity. And in that way, that kind of conceptualization, that kind of definition, I think broadens the robustness of mental toughness. Actually, it's not a bad thing to be mentally sensitive, and actually being mentally sensitive is very useful in certain situations. You must have found that in your feedback, Doug, to the executives and the sports people that you've worked with, is actually reframing this idea of the opposite of being high in mental toughness, being mentally sensitive, is actually, this isn't a bad thing, is it?
No, and for a lot of people, it's an eye opener. And Peter mentioned that we've now got to the stage where we understand that there are 8 factors, so there are 8 dimensions of mental toughness, and each of them is a continuum. And so the complexity here, but it's a very rich complexity, is that we can be mentally tough or mentally sensitive on each of those factors. So we can have a profile. So we can be mentally tough in some areas and mentally sensitive in others. And that's really, really important because, we work with a lot of high performers in a lot of fields, and they will often rest on 3 or 4 areas of their mental toughness. So there'll be things like they've got a high sense of life control, they've got a high sense of can-do, a high level of achievement orientation, but they may also have a low level of mental toughness in another area. And quite often that might be something like emotional control. So they don't manage their emotions. They allow their emotions to creep into their decisions and actions, and it actually undermines what they do with their areas of mental toughness. And so sometimes it's a surprise for them to find, I'm a high achiever. I've done great things throughout my life and my career. You mean there are areas that actually get in the way? So this notion of mental toughness and mental sensitivity is critically important. And there's another big word we will very often use, and that's self-awareness. If you're not self-aware about your mental toughness profile, you're not optimizing it.
And that's what profiles give us, great conversations around helping people become aware of their mental states. And before we dive into the specifics of the 4 C's, the 4C model of mental toughness that you've developed, John, just coming to you there, let's again dwell on this mental toughness versus mental sensitivity, and that mental sensitivity isn't a bad thing. Do you find that to be true in sport? And if so, do you find that actually eye-opening for sports coaches, for athletes, for competitors, for participants, that actually a degree of mental sensitivity isn't a bad thing?
It is. I always find it strangely eye-opening, to be honest, I suppose, because I kind of always did sports coaching alongside sports psychology at the same time. So the two for me went hand in hand. But of course, often people might do one and then be introduced to the other. And it always kind of makes me chuckle a little bit, because when it comes to all other aspects of a performance, be it technical or tactical or physical, we understand nuance. So if you're a golfer, we recognise that you don't just go, you're good at golf or you're bad at golf. You recognise you might have a great drive, you might be good on the greens, you might be good with your long irons, but maybe your wedge plays a bit weaker than the rest of your game. So that doesn't mean that, all of a sudden you're a bad golfer, but you recognise, okay, well, having that awareness, knowing what I'm really good at and what I'm not so good at, how can I kind of plot my way around this course to make sure that I exploit my strengths and I don't get caught out by what I'm not so good at? And then when we talk about mental skills, people kind of forget all that nuance and go, so you're good at this or bad at this? And you go, well, no, it's just the same. And I'm always using these kind of analogies towards whether it's technical or tactical or physical elements of performances, and going, coaches are really, really good at nuance when they remember to do nuance. Otherwise, they wouldn't be great coaches. So actually, I find once you start talking to coaches and they start to get that nuance, they love it. And they're actually really, really good at implementing it, because that's their job, to find nuance that helps performance. So it's just once you kind of spread that awareness of, this isn't just a word that we use, but this is actually quite a complicated psychological construct with lots of elements to it. I think that kind of sparks a bit of interest then And normally, being able to find individual elements that combined will help a performance, well, that's what coaches are really good at doing. So they often thrive when they start to understand that.
So the opposite of mental toughness isn't mental weakness, it's mental sensitivity. And what I hear you say there, John, and I love your analogy, having been a golfer, I love your analogy of, you're going to have strengths and you're going to have areas that you'd like to improve. And you've got to chart your way around the golf course depending on those strengths and let's call them weaknesses. In life, one might want to cultivate an environment and engage in behaviors in accordance to your mental toughness and your mental sensitivity is kind of what I'm hearing here. And going a little bit more granular, you have a 4C model of mental toughness that can start to help people break this down a little further in terms of how to develop one's toughness. Coming to you here, Peter, what was the genesis of this 4C model? Where did this come from? I believe it came from hardiness and research on hardiness and interviews. Can you tell us a little bit about the background, the history here?
Yeah. So, the 4Cs model developed out of an applied psychology project, basically looking at why people dropped the ball when they played rugby. So we were looking at the flanker test and attention, and it became apparent it was more complex. There was something deeper going on. There's the skills, there's the knowledge, the attitude. So digging around a bit, interviewing people, it became apparent because resilience, as I say, is about coping, and it's a bit two-dimensional. And coaches quite like it. They like resilient players, but then it needs more than that. Hardiness had a number of strengths. One of the challenges was it was very North American in its design, in its questionnaire, in its approach, which, I spend my time, you can tell by the accent, in the north of England, it didn't play well when I was talking to rugby league players about self-actualising and using words like that.
Yes.
The concept worked, the words didn't work.
Yeah.
And the bit which was missing, which was odd because I trained as a sports psychologist initially, was confidence. It had areas of control, commitment and challenge, slightly defined differently, but confidence was missing. And I knew as a sports psychologist, I was brought in often too late, right at the end, to help build people's confidence. And I rarely did control, commitment and challenge work.
Yeah.
In business, I rarely did confidence work. I did control, commitment and challenge. So it was putting those together. And I started off the work looking at goal kickers because in rugby league, because that looks a high pressure role. And actually, they cope really well because they know their percentages. You'd think if it was me and I had to take a kick in the last minute, how terrible that will be and how stressful. But they know the odds from every angle. So, 45 degrees, they know they have a 32% of kicking from. So that impressed me. And then working forward from there, we developed the idea, became the 4Cs model. And from that, we moved away from a single unitary concept, which is where I started. Because I went to interview coaches and they said, player X isn't tough enough. And I said, so what does that mean? And they said, don't know. They're a bit strange, funny, they get a bit upset. Talking to the players, they were interested in paying the mortgage, the family life, the fact the kids have been a problem at school. So far more complex. And then putting all that together, we developed the questionnaire and then the model. And then with John's and Doug's help, we moved it on to even more nuance into the 8 factors. So what we're trying to get is away from the idea that person A is tough, person B is sensitive. Because that was the dangers all along. If you ask the person on the London omnibus, they will say, blokes are tougher than women. There is absolutely no evidence of that. It's expressed differently. It looks different. So if you look just at behaviour and what you see from the outside, you make many, many mistakes. You need to know what's going on in somebody's head, really. Not in any deep. You don't have to sit and lie them on a couch and talk about their past experiences. But when somebody does something, and I was brought up on this tradition, if you want to know why they're doing it, ask them. Sometimes they don't know, and that's where giving them feedback and talking about profiles and giving them a hypothesis is a really powerful technique. Yeah, sometimes you don't know why you do stuff, but you know more than anybody else. And the coaches are not as judgy as fans. Fans are really mean, but coaches sometimes think it's the classic. They're not trying, and I've never met a professional sports person who didn't try.
Yeah.
You always try. Most people in the job, and it's the same when people are rating lecturers, they don't put any effort in. How do you know that? So it's getting underneath the skin, based on a model, based on a questionnaire, and then discussing with the person. So we're using self-awareness a lot. We're using nuanced a lot, and I'll use one of John's quotes because we do listen to each other. It's a joy to work as a team. There's some very simple models around, but there's not many simple people.
Yeah.
So what we want is a balance between enough complexity to pick up what's going on, but not so complex you've got 200 factors, but then giving the person a chance of talking through it. Because sometimes it's wrong. Most of the times it's right, and it's a good starting point of a discussion. But my first ever paper, I've now shut up, it was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And one of the problems is sports psychology is to go and fix something that wasn't a problem in the first place, because they have the tools. So we'll teach them goal setting. They might be fine. Somebody high on commitment is fine on goal setting. So it's about individualizing to the team and then to the individual players.
Yeah, you might be prescribing something that's actually not needed or is present already. Coming to you, Doug, what I'm hearing here, what I'm starting to picture in my mind, and I'm sure the audience is as well, is a continuum, a mental toughness continuum, from sensitive to tough, and underpinning sensitive to tough, underpinning this continuum are four skills: control, commitment, challenge, confidence. So would I be right in saying that you'll measure those four skills, and you'll start having a conversation with people, with sports people, with people in the workplace, around these four skills, how they can flex those skills? Would I be correct in saying that? And can you speak a little bit to your experience of helping people flex those skills?
Well, we can go to an even more granular level, as Peter has suggested. We now can get to 8 factors. And the reason why that's so critically important is that when we talk about self-awareness, it's comparatively easy to become self-aware about things like skills and knowledge. There are really obvious tests for that. And even behavior, we can see behavior. What we're talking about is, what my two colleagues have said, is something inside your head. It's invisible. So how can you be self-aware about something you can't see and can't touch? And so the development of the questionnaire is very, very important, because we now have a framework. We can explain it, mental toughness, in terms of these 4 constructs and the 8 factors, but we can also now, with a reasonable degree of success, assess your level of mental toughness in each of these areas. So one of my colleagues has coined a nice little phrase: we've made the invisible visible. So we've been able to bring out onto the table what's going on inside somebody's head. Now, once you've done that, there are lots of things you can do. And you can work around the nuances. You can make people aware about, we strenuously avoid the term strength and weakness, but we tend to talk about advantage. Mental toughness can give you an advantage. However, not always. So, for instance, we will quite commonly come across people who have got high levels of life control. Somebody who's got high levels of life control has got a high sense of self-worth, high sense of can-do, and that usually gets them to a degree, a level of success. So they can do it. When they engage with other people, if they're not self-aware about their impact on other people, what happens is a phrase that almost everybody will recognize. Every time I use it, people kind of nod and smile. They will turn to other people and say, well, I can do it, why can't you? And if you're in a team setting, or you're having to rely on other people, you're not switching them on, you're not getting them behind you, you are creating a distance. So your own performance begins to be impacted. So these are the kind of subtleties that we can kind of begin to work on. And similarly, somebody who's got a very low level of life control, somebody who's mentally sensitive in that area, will look at somebody who's very mentally tough in this area and might say, my God, you're a big head. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I don't understand you. So if you don't create self-awareness about who you are and why you see other people the way you do, things like teamworking and getting the best out of the people around you is extremely difficult. So, but this is something we have learned in our journey, because when we started, we had a very simple picture. We had the 4 C's, and we started to explore that. We listened a lot. I mean, throughout the last 20 years, we've listened to practitioners who come back to us. I mean, quite literally, I've had 2 people come back this week saying, I've come across this. Can you explain this? They can't always explain it, but you've got to go away and find an explanation. And that's where most of our development of the concept has come from. And it works. It plays out nicely with the people that we need to help to be different or to develop.
I think it's so fascinating, Doug, because you hit on something there that I think is often overlooked, is that we crave in sport for that intrapersonal toughness, if you like, without perhaps considering the interpersonal dynamic there. The number of conversations I've had with coaches who might initiate a conversation around, oh, well, this player's weak. Now, we can call that mentally sensitive now, but oh, this player's weak. Craving for that player to be tough, to be able to take control, to commit, to be able to engage in high challenge, to let's say perform or learn, develop with confidence. And yet what you're clearly saying there is actually when we consider behavior from a group perspective, actually toughness can actually cause some challenges there to teamship, cause some challenges in our environment. That tough character can actually see things very one-dimensionally. Well, I can do it. Well, you just get on with it. And you hear this from British pundits in football. This is ridiculous. It's simple. They should be just doing this. She should be doing that. Why aren't they doing? Why aren't they engaging with full control and full commitment? And it's like these are intrapersonal skills that are very, very challenging. And also in sport, we have to consider that balance between competition and cooperation as well. And coming to you, John, I mean, perhaps again, you've been a football coach. Let's talk about what we've just discussed there from let's say, a sporting or football perspective, and maybe you can put some more meat on the bone for us around those 4 C's in terms of what that looks like in a footballing environment or sporting environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. And I suppose one of the things in terms of teams and that interpersonal element is whether it's ideas, whether it's different kind of attributes that people have. We recognise these days that actually diversity is what gives you the strength overall in a team. And if everybody sees everything the same way, you become this sort of fairly one-dimensional group of people and a bit of an echo chamber. So that diversity is great to see. And in terms of so how can I start to incorporate this model of mental toughness that we have, the 4 C's, the different elements of it. So we have challenge, confidence, control, commitment. So if I pick up on challenge, say, okay, so challenge is it's essentially the extent to which we see opportunities as opposed to threats. So think about kind of stress appraisals and those kind of things. And it's something that actually Suzanne Kobasa did some brilliant work on in health psychology, because people, the way that people respond to a diagnosis and things like that. You fight an illness, you don't suffer from an illness. Those kind of things can make a big difference. our research over the years has further broken that down into what we call a risk orientation and a learning orientation. So risk orientations, I guess attributes of mentally tough performers would be people who are prepared to take a risk. Now, when I say that, it's important to recognize that none of these factors sit completely independently, because the more confidence I have in my abilities, the more likely I am to think I'm going to succeed. Therefore, I'm more likely to take a risk. Okay, so there's an interplay between all of them. But let's think about an example where perhaps in a games-based practice, a player tries a really penetrative pass, tries to play it through the lines to set someone through. It's a risky pass and it gets cut out by the defender. It's very easy as a coach to just say, oh, good effort, and carry on. Or even to criticise them if you want to do. But actually, there's an opportunity where we might want to just pause and learn. And I might just stop and say, do you know what? I love that you tried that pass. Talk me through the process. You know, you perceptual. What were you thinking when you received the ball? Why did you turn that way? Why did you play that pass? And I might be looking for them to say that they perhaps wasn't thinking too much. Great. Shows they were in the moment. It shows that they weren't considering the possibility that they might mess up. So they're not being affected by things. So I actually quite like sometimes the response of, I don't know, I thought it was on and I could make it. Okay, so, but by asking them that question, it brings about an awareness across the rest of the team that that's the kind of mindset that takes the risk that's going to be the difference between playing it safe or an opportunity. But of course, let's remember the role of coaching is to improve people. So if that pass was cut out, we'll go, I love that you took the risk. Now let's learn from it. And that's where we move into learning orientation. And we'll say, why was it cut out? And again, it's so easy when you're coaching to forget to ask the question of why. Why did that not happen? And they might have a clear explanation. It might have been a problem with the technical execution. You know, maybe they lifted the head or whatever, or maybe it was a perceptual issue where they didn't quite judge the speed that was required on it, or whatever it might be. But by asking those questions, without making it sound like psychology, without making it sound like I'm being a psychologist and throwing complicated things at you, by just saying that I loved that you tried that pass, talk me through your process, why did you do it? What were you thinking? And then by saying, why didn't it work out? Why do you think it didn't work out? We're actually encouraging risk orientation and learning orientation. And it's not going to be something that you do once in a training session and all of a sudden somebody's mentally tough the next day. But that's the integration of psychology into coaching, that it just builds that kind of culture of people embracing challenges and learning from when it doesn't quite go as planned. And I'll allow the coaches to, when they all rush out and buy the book available in all good bookshops, to work through some of the other components. And you don't have to have a PhD in psychology to implement this stuff. You can think, okay, well, how can I simply just integrate that into what I do? I don't have to pull out the chaise lounge and get them to sit there and ask them to tell me about the relationship with their father. Like, I can just build it into the questions I ask as a coach, and sometimes slow down some of the practice to say, okay, so how does that relate to what we're trying to develop from a mental side of things?
I'm going to reflect back what I heard there, because I think this is really important. Because what your work is offering here is a framework, a framework for the mental side of the game. Mental toughness, mental sensitivity. When we're on the pitch or we're on the court, when we're playing 90 minutes or 80 minutes or 4 quarters, one can pretty much assume that we want to be towards the mental toughness side of things with these 4 constructs: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. But by offering coaches a framework, you give them the opportunity to then fire questions away in accordance to what they're seeing unfold on the pitch, that then can help players retrieve what they're doing, rehearse what they're doing, to think about, and then therefore that offers coaches the opportunity to reinforce what they're doing, what they're thinking, to reinforce that around those four constructs: commitment, challenge, confidence, and control. And so you're continually, in every practice session, every training session, you're building a blueprint, building a blueprint of toughness. No question there, guys, but does that, and this can come to any one of you, does that, how I've summed that up, does that sort of neatly sum up what you're trying to do, say, as a coach in practice, this offers a framework?
Yeah, I would absolutely say so, in that there's no quick fixes in any sort of psychological thing, and anybody who's worked as a sports psychologist has come across the you wouldn't get a strength and conditioning coach in and say turn these into super fit humans in a week. So as a psychologist going into people, we sometimes kind of fall foul of that. The way to genuinely develop things like mental toughness is for it to become part of what you do on an ongoing basis. It's not about kind of waving a magic wand and trying to get some kind of fix. It's fairly dispositional, to be honest. We've lots of studies, some that come from brain scans, some that come from identical twins and all those kind of things, that show us that at least 50% of all these elements that we call mental toughness are genetically informed.
Yeah.
Now, I think that's actually quite a good place to be. We all kind of understand individual differences, personality traits, those kind of things now, to sort of be a bit interactional, in that you're certainly genetically predisposed in a certain way, but there's an extent to which they can be changed over time.
Yep.
They don't change quickly, but the advantage is, because by definition they're relatively enduring and stable, when you do get that change, it's a lasting change. It's something that you can continue to build on over a lifetime. It's not some sort of quick state intervention that makes you feel better for a couple of weeks and then you go back to where you were a few weeks later. So hard to develop, but absolutely worth it in the long run.
Well, I mean, interestingly, coming back at you at the genetic scenario there, I mean, my understanding from personality psychology is that, we're talking about traits being 40 to 50%, having a 40 to 50% hereditary link. And I've heard Dr. Colin de Jong from the Minnesota Personality Lab suggesting that with some traits there can be anything up to an 80% shift across the lifespan, potentially. But with the emphasis on it's challenging. It's challenging and it requires effort. And on the Sports Psych Show, we've spoken to Professor Dan McAdams about this, who's at Northwestern University, and also Dr. Christian Jarrett, who's got a great book out on personality. So it's all thrown into the mix. I'd love to go more granular now. These eight factors keep cropping up, but we actually haven't dived into those. So I'd like to invite any one of you who feels confident enough, tough enough to tell us about these eight factors, go through them briefly, and then we can build from there.
Okay, so I'll leap in here.
Go for it.
So we've got four constructs: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. Each of them have got two factors that contribute to the construct. With control, we've got life control, and life control is essentially describing your sense of self-worth, describing your sense of can-do. You can have two people with equal amounts of ability, experience, education, and yet they'll respond differently to a particular situation. And that's another nuance that is important in this, because when we're talking about the practical application of this, what we're often talking about is people who've got skills, knowledge, and don't understand why they're not doing better with that, and why somebody with a different level of skills and knowledge can outperform them. That difference is in their head. So, sometimes we can forget that mental toughness is in the context of our skills and knowledge and everything else. It's not the factor, it's a big factor. But coming back to control, the other aspect of control is emotional control. And that's really a misnomer, because we're really talking about emotional management. So we can't really control whether we're angry or joyous or upset about something, but what we can do is control what we show to other people, and we can control the extent to which we allow it to influence our actions and our decisions. That's really important. In sport, you don't want to lose it. You might be frustrated about losing a stupid goal, but you don't want it to affect your next moves. We move around to commitment. Commitment's got two elements. It's got goal orientation, and that's essentially about the extent to which, when you are wanting to do something that's significant for you, can you visualize what success will look like, what you've got to achieve. Some of us can do that, others can't. Most of us can appreciate what goals are, and if somebody explains a goal to us, we'll get it, but not everybody can visualize that goal. But of course, not everybody who visualizes goals does what it takes to achieve them. So the other factor here is achievement orientation. And that's really describing the extent to which I am mentally prepared to make the effort or do what it takes to achieve my goals. Some people will find effort quite disagreeable. They would like to achieve the goal, but can't be bothered to make the effort. Well, but other people are quite happy to make the effort, the sacrifice, and so on. And then we move around, and John's already touched upon the challenge construct. It consists of two factors: risk orientation, that's the extent to which we see opportunity rather than threat, and are open to taking riskier steps, or we tend to go back to doing whatever is safe. And learning orientation. Learning orientation, I often think, is at the heart of mental toughness concept, because we know that the other 50% of mental toughness is learned from our experiences. So if we're reflective, we learn from our experiences. So I think there's kind of an interesting connection between learning orientation and mental toughness. And the last area, which is really Peter's big contribution to the concept, is confidence, which is about self-belief. And that's got two factors: confidence and abilities. And it's interesting, this is not really about the level of ability you have. We did an interesting project way back in the 1990s, when we were working in the civil service with a group of incredibly clever people. I mean, these were people that straight out of Oxford and Cambridge, and they were mixed in exercises with people who, well, they were clever, but they didn't have the experience and knowledge that these people had. And yet they were able to influence those people significantly. And what we realized is, even though these people were very clever, were very able, they didn't believe in their own ability, so they didn't use it. So, and that's a really interesting notion. And the last factor is interpersonal confidence, and that's really describing the extent to which we are mentally open to engaging with other people. And sometimes that manifests itself as the extent to which I'll ask questions of other people. Very often we will say to somebody, "Why did you do that? Why, you were asked to do something, you didn't do it properly because you didn't understand it. Why didn't you ask a question?" And the answer will be, "I didn't want to look stupid." And a mentally tough individual isn't worried about looking and sounding stupid. Their focus is elsewhere. So those are the 8 factors, and yes, they're interrelated, but they're also reasonably independent, and that's also important.
So we've got control, life and emotional, commitment, goal orientation and achievement orientation, challenge, risk orientation and learning orientation, and confidence, broken down into confidence in ability and interpersonal confidence. I'd love to come back to you here, Peter, and put you in a time machine, because at the beginning of the show you talked about not quite having the mindset that potentially could have helped you kick on with your rugby league career. If you could get in that time machine and go back, which of these factors would have made the biggest difference to you, and why?
Okay, so I'll go back in my time machine. Yeah, 17-year-old version of me, northwest of England, wet day, standing on the wing playing Workington, and the Workington winger being 18 foot taller than me, spent the entire game pointing, pointing and smiling at me, and I thought, oh dear. I'm in trouble here. So it was that inner dialogue, and that was the negative dialogue. So I would think that it would be a tie between commitment and confidence, because it's a commitment to the career. What do I want to do here? And my thought was, I probably don't want to get bounced all around Cumbria. I'll go to university instead. So it's about making choices on that thing, and the confidence is he got in my head. He didn't actually do anything. He would have torn me apart had he caught me. I'm pretty sure, but it was enough. Was the threat? I was overthinking. I was thinking all the negatives. What's going to happen? What if it all goes bad? I could have thought positively and thought, I'll just go under his legs. Yeah, I'm quick. I'll be away. But what I thought was it all going wrong. So that's the confidence issues. It was those, but then, yeah, that was a world. We go back to diversity and the importance of diversity in mental toughness. That was a world where you had to be a certain type, because if you're sensitive, perhaps you change the way the team works. Perhaps you're coaching. If you've got good hands, good feet, but you're a sensitive soul, absolutely fine. It's just different, because if you clone everybody, you're an easy team to beat. If you're all the same, there's no variability. You want a range. So I'm not saying they should have. Yes, they were a bit bemused about the fact I had a ponytail and I wanted to go to university. To be fair, in those days, it wasn't a good fit. But now the world has come on, and you don't all have to be the same. And actually, it's the Moneyball moment. I tend to work with teams because there's a lot of talented individuals out there who aren't particularly tough, but there's ways forward for them. So they can be toughened up, they can behave in a tough way in certain circumstances, or you can change the way you're playing. Yeah, small bits of play. Bring them on for 20 minutes. Don't shout at them. It's that communication. Yes, this idea of geeing players up by screaming abuse in the face works really badly for some, works really well for others. So it's about that individualisation. So to go back to 17-year-old me, it was probably the right decision not to play rugby. Sometimes it's the flogging the dead horse phenomenon. You're doing something you quite like, but you're not that talented. There's other ways forward. Is a brave decision to make, and we sometimes see swimmers, for example, who decide they don't want to get up at 4 a.m. for 2 hours. So there's lots mulling around, but basically, I would have taught myself now, just don't let him get in your head. or do it back. Smile back is what I'd do nowadays.
What I'm hearing you say there is it's quite a complex landscape, but when push comes to shove, when you're out there competing, you have got to be able to flex. And what I'm hearing from you, Peter, because you've had a couple of decades of rich experience working with teams and individuals from a range of areas, but a lot in sport, is that this notion of it's important. Number one, it's important to have thinking and behavioural differences within a team, within an organisation. And number two, that players can flex, that they might have a preference along that continuum in different circumstances, but they can flex their thinking. They can flex their behaviours to become more sensitive or to become tougher. That sounds to me like those are the two important experiences you've had over the last couple of decades of consulting, utilising this model.
Can I just jump in there with a quick one, Dan? Because and I say I'm jumping in, I'm stealing this from Peter actually, but sometimes it's about acting tougher. It's not actually about being tougher, because you have the moment to moment elements. And where I say I'm stealing it from Peter, I remember him telling me many years ago that, look, imagine you have to do a presentation in front of a lot of people, If you're an extrovert, then that's less exhausting for you.
Yes.
It's more natural. You can go and do it. Does that mean that an introvert can't give a good presentation? No. Now, you don't turn the introvert into an extrovert so they can go do a presentation, but that introvert can learn skills, can be more assertive, to learn to go and act like an extrovert for a short period of time. They might find it more tiring, more emotionally draining than an extrovert would, but they can still act like an extrovert for that period of time. So just because maybe your emotional control is on the lower end of the scale, that doesn't mean that you can't manage your emotions for a period of time. You might have to work harder than somebody else to do it. And that's where that self-awareness, that knowledge that naturally I'm not great at managing my emotions, therefore I have to put a bit more preparation into how I'm going to do that. I might have to think about a few more what-if scenarios during the week leading up to a game, because I'm aware that I need to be able to kind of get on top of this element for a period of time becomes useful. So we can certainly, I know you talk about game face quite a bit, Dan, which I think is very useful, in that game face can sometimes, even if you are pretty mentally sensitive and you're aware of where those sensitivities are, then your game face can still have elements of, well, I'm not going to go show that. I'm going to go act for 70, 80, 90 minutes like a mentally tough person.
Yeah, and what you're saying there, John, makes me think of so many different things. Whether it's the experience of talking with Sian Bylock, the on the Sports Psych show, the expert in performing under pressure, and she talked with us about the importance of embodiment, essentially embodying who you want to be in the moment, can be a way to deliver with that toughness. It makes me think, I mean, you're alluding to my sort of technique of game face, and I drew upon several researchers there, but talking with the neuroscientist on the Sports Psych show, Lisa Feldman Barrett, and her theory of constructed emotion, and just how we experience these feelings and these emotions, and our concepts help us to manage how we feel, help us to manage our emotions. And so the concept of acting as if can be a useful thing to engage in. You've sparked a few things in me there, John. I mean, just I'd be keen to finish things on a quick conversation around mental health, and I know you dedicate some pages in the book to the relationship between mental toughness and mental health, and I think this is really pertinent. We've had quite a few guests on recently, post-Olympic Games, talking about mental health, not just because of the Olympic Games, but certainly there was a lot of noise and a lot of narrative around mental health within the Olympics. I'd love to and again, it could be a question fired at any one of you, to have a brief conversation about this, because I think sometimes mental toughness and mental health aren't necessarily drawn together. So, can one of you speak to mental toughness and mental health at all?
Can I have the first shotty? I think we're all keen to be involved in this discussion.
Please, yeah, let's get all three of you involved.
So because sport has moved on. So we have a lot of research which shows a clear link. High levels of mental toughness relate to high levels of mental well-being in school children, in teachers, across the domain. So there's a certain advantage. We talk about the mental toughness advantage. Mentally tough people tend to be healthier and happier. Now, in sport, there's lots of mentally tough people, so it's not an issue. As you broaden your base of who gets brought into sport, then you need more support. And I know the rugby league has a support for players now, and it's about back to this recognizing differences and thinking, from the sports club and the coach's point of view, perhaps change what you do. Yeah, it's always been the case. It's like junior doctors. Yeah, they work 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours, and that's just the rites of passage. And you think, why? And yeah, I do get annoyed when I see sports coaches getting people running around the pitch in the pouring rain because they've dropped the ball. Now, for people like me, that was great. Yeah, a bit of physical challenge. Other people, it damages and dents them. So it's knowing the players, and it's also putting support systems in place. And that's about teams. That's about, what's the role of the captain and a leader in sport, and bringing that out. So it's recognising the differences. But sometimes sport has to change itself, because I won't talk about the specific team I worked with, but they had a punishment regime. So if you made a mistake in the game, you got a certain number of points, which could have your head shaved. It could be, and that's still going on. I mean, it just does. Now, as a sports psychologist, we want to change the institution, we want to change the club climate, we want to change the players, but it's not always blaming the players who can't hack it. And yeah, I've had many conversations where, well, why do you do that then? Yes, yeah. The guy won't sing a song on the coach where everybody has to sing, and you think, well, he don't want to. Yeah, explain to me, and it's back to what John was saying when you're asking players to explain why they hoof the ball up the pitch. It's getting coaches to explain what they think they're doing, because they're doing it for the best of reasons. So that's my peneth. But we can help players cope with it. We can acknowledge that some players need more support, but clubs need to put in support systems. And I know Premiership football teams have to have sports psychologists, and it's all there. But it's still milling around in the sports I'm involved in. Is the idea that if you're a bit wimpy, it's not good. And I think it's a hard lesson for us to keep teaching. And sometimes mental toughness gets hijacked, because clearly in this talk, we're not saying everybody has to be mentally tough. We're not saying there's anything wrong with being sensitive. And it's not just about sucking it up and dealing with it. It's about expressing your emotions. It's about talking about things like mental health issues. And that's my starter.
And I'd love to come to you in a second, Doug, around mental health and the corporate sector and mental toughness. But I mean, I listening to you there, Peter, and I, having done 15 years of work in football, and I think a lot of, I know every coach means well and they're striving to help players high perform. It's just striving to do that in the healthiest and safest way possible, and doing things that actually do induce high performance. And I couldn't think of anything, collecting data on mistakes and then punishing based on that data. I couldn't think of anything else that could promote or induce fear more than that. It seems completely counterintuitive, but I suppose that's just my opinion. If we want people to engage in behavioural approach rather than behavioural inhibition, it strikes me that punishing mistakes is actually going to promote inhibition rather than approach. But coming to you, Doug, you do so much work in the corporate sector utilising this model. Mental health, people in the workplace. Can you talk a little bit about this with relation to mental toughness?
Well, it's a big area of application, and in a way it's gone full circle. When in 2002, when Peter published the first piece of work on the 4Cs concept, the community that picked it up first were the people who were interested in stress management and mental health. And then we went into performance, but performance is directly related to mental health. You can't perform if you don't enjoy good well-being. And and similarly, if you perform and you're successful, it actually makes you feel better. So there is that kind of connection. But I'm also quite aware that there's been some great research on mental toughness and its relationship with mental health. And the thing that strikes me is this normality message. There's about a dozen papers come from the University of Basel, and they all point to the fact that whether you're mentally tough or mentally sensitive, you can be anxious, you can be depressed, you can get stressed. Mental toughness seems to give you an advantage. It enables you to deal better with anxiety, stress, and depression. So one of the things that I think is important and that enters into a lot of our work is being stressed or depressed is normal. Almost all of us experience that at some time. And here is a framework that helps us to understand why we might be responding to events the way we do. And here is a device, the measure, that helps us to measure that. That is enabling us to understand why I get depressed in a particular situation, or why I can't do anything about my anxiety. So that's that's the thing that strikes me most, and it appeals to every sector. I mean, we do a lot of work in corporate, we do an awful lot of work in education, especially in higher education. It's really interesting how many higher education institutions are interested in the well-being and the mental health of undergraduates. And it's not difficult to understand why, because in a sense they're immature adults that haven't developed all the coping mechanisms and the skills to be able to deal with anxiety and pressure, but we put them under pressure. So, yeah, so the thing that impresses me most, and the message we try to get out, is anxiety, depression, stress is normal. Just because you're depressed, you are not unusual. You're not a failure.
Interesting. And finally, coming to you, John, from, I suppose, a sporting perspective, did you have any additional thoughts there, listening to Peter and Doug, and considering the relationship between mental toughness and mental health? Any experiences you want to share, and any thoughts maybe on sort of the Olympic Games and those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, well, obviously my esteemed colleagues have put it across so well there, but the the truth is, when you
Yeah.
understand what mental toughness is, when you look at the research, so for example, from the likes of Marcus Gerber and Serge Brand and so on, it suggests that yes, mental toughness is linked to better quality of sleep at night. You'll still have anxiety, you'll still have stress, but you'll manage it better. You're less likely to burn out as a result. So you might encounter the same amount of stress, but because you're managing, it has that kind of buffering aspect. And the more we understand genuinely what mental toughness is, then and that's why this book is out. It means that we see the likes of Simone Biles or Ben Stokes or whoever might take a break. That's kind of an exemplar of mental toughness. That's somebody who's looking at the situation, and rather than letting and it's incredibly pressurizing, incredibly stressful situations, rather than that dictating my well-being, I'm going to take control of my own well-being. And if that means I need to take a break, so I'm not like so many gymnasts and tennis players and so on retiring at 26. And look at even when people look back at Martina Hingis and Justin Henin Arden and Bjorn Borg and all these players retiring in their early to mid 20s in tennis, we don't want that. We want Serena Williams, we want Roger Federer, and we want these really brilliant sports performers carrying on so we can enjoy watching them for so much longer. And if that means they're able to take a step back and say, I'm going to control this, I'm going to take charge of my own well-being so I can take charge of where I go, that's mental toughness in action. And the reason why I think it's so important is people aren't going to stop using the word mental toughness if we stop researching it. They will still use it. And all the people that might use the phrase in the wrong, very outdated way, well, if we're not trying to put that right and provide actually evidence-informed links towards advantages for health and well-being and performance and relationships and aspirations and so on, then we've no kind of fight to be able to have a positive influence on that, and we kind of let the misinformation win in that sense because it's an attractive term. People are going to use it. So the more we understand what it actually is, I think the more positive the impact will be.
Well, thanks for that, John. And gents, this has been such a rich conversation, and I can't thank you enough. I think it's a fascinating area, and I just love the fact that you've built a really strong model that ranges from a continuum right the way down to the granular detail, those 4 constructs and the 8 factors that feed the 4 constructs that then feed the continuum. So I think it's a really clear model that coaches can use as a framework on and off the pitch, on and off the court or the course. So thank you so much. And maybe coming to you, John, how can people get hold of the book? Remind us of its title. How can people get hold of it?
Yep, so it's Developing Mental Toughness with the subline of strategies to improve performance, resilience and well-being in individuals and organisations. It's the 3rd edition. I'm the newbie to the team, if you will. Peter and Doug have kind of carried it this far. And it's published by Kogan Page, available on the Kogan Page website, all good bookshops and some rubbish ones as well.
And Amazon and the usual sort of online
Of
retailers,
course.
I'm assuming. Okay, brilliant. Well, look, to finish off, I always invite guests to note how people can potentially follow them and get in touch, because I'm sure you've tapped the interest of the Sports Psych Show audience. I'm not too sure if you all use social media, but again, John, if we start with you, how can people follow you, find you if you want to be found?
You can indeed follow me on Twitter at John Perry81 without giving away my age. But I could do with a few followers, to be honest. So that'd be handy. I could do with some of yours, Dan. I see you've got hordes of followers there.
Shameless tweeter. I am a shameless tweeter, and so people can contact you there.
Yes, I'll get back to them.
Okay, perfect. Doug, how can people find you, follow you, and get in contact if you'd like to be contacted?
Well, I'm a fellow Twitter, so Twitter at Strycharczyk. But probably the best social media platform is LinkedIn.
Yes.
So people just have to learn how to spell my name to find me.
Do you want to spell that out for us?
Right, yes. So it's Doug, D-O-U-G. They should be able to manage that. You'd be surprised. Strycharczyk. Yeah.
Gotcha. Perfect.
That's a mouthful. But I'm also happy for people to connect by an email. So there's Doug at aqr.co.uk.
And last but not least, the founding father of all of this, Professor Peter Clough. Can you be found? Do you want to be found? How can people get in contact?
I want to be found, but I'm the dinosaur of the group. I'm old school. Best way to contact me is through Doug and John. I really like questions. I really like ideas. But yes, my social media presence is minimal, to say the least. But don't get me wrong, I do like to talk to people, but I'm just old-fashioned, old school, or just slow. Whichever you want to define it.
Not at all. I think it's actually what we're now realizing, right? Is that's the best way to be. Is that actually you can place your attention on your work rather than surfing social media. So I don't blame you at all. Well, gents, look, I can't thank you enough for your time. As I said, that was a really rich conversation, and hopefully you feel we've done some justice to your model. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, everybody, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.